The Hole in the Wall is a creepy ghost story about a young man who is able to spy on his neighbor through a peephole. There was a young man who started college in a big city. He didn't have much money, so the only place he could afford to rent was in an old, run-down apartment building that was in a bad area of the city. When he moved in, he found that the apartment was in a bad state of repair. The floor was dusty and stained, the furniture was falling apart, and the wallpaper was peeling off the walls. After unpacking his belongings, he decided to try and tidy up the apartment a lit. As he was tearing off a piece of peeling wallpaper, he happened to uncover a small hole in the wall. Peeking through the hole, he discovered that he could see into his neighbor's apartment. There was nobody home, so he just plugged up the hole with some tissue paper and set about dusting and cleaning the place. The next evening, when he came home from college, he got into the elevator and a beautiful woman stepped in after him. As they ascended, the man couldn't take his eyes off the young woman's shapely legs and generous curves. The elevator stopped on his floor and he got out. He was surprised to see the woman was following him. He walked down the corridor, and when he reached his apartment, he looked over his shoulder. The young woman was opening the door of the apartment next to his. He realized that she was his neighbor. Once inside his apartment, the young man couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful woman next door. Unable to resist the temptation, he decided to take a peep through the hole in the wall. When he put his eye up to the hole and peeked in, he had a perfect view of the entire apartment. He was shocked when he saw the woman start taking off her clothes and preparing to take a shower. The woman apparently wasn't aware of the peephole, so the young man kept quiet and watched her undress. He couldn't believe his luck and was disappointed when she turned off the lights and went to bed. In the middle of the night, the young man woke up to the sound of groaning coming from the apartment next door. He wondered what it was and decided to look through the hole in the wall. He was horrified by what he saw. There was a tall man standing over the young woman. He held a long, thin knife in his hand and kept stabbing her over and over. The young woman was groaning in pain and lay in a pool of blood. The young man was so shocked by the scene before him that he couldn't move a muscle. His knees felt weak and his stomach churned. Before the college student had a chance to think, the tall man delivered one last blow and the groans ceased. The woman was dead. The murderer grabbed some things and made his way out of the apartment. As he was closing the apartment door behind him, the killer turned and the young man got a good look at his face. He had a thin nose, a dark beard, and a long scar on the side of his cheek. He would be easy to identify. The young man ran into his bedroom and grabbed his mobile phone. He was about to call the police when he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He held the phone in his trembling hands as his mind began to race. If he reported this to the police, they would find out that he had been spying on the woman through the hole in the wall. His neighbors would find out about it. His friends and family would find out. What would they say? What would they think of him? He would be embarrassed beyond belief. Slowly, he placed the phone on his bedside table and sat down. He never called the police. The next evening, when the young man returned from college, the police were waiting at his door. They told him that his next-door neighbor had been murdered during the night and said they needed to ask him some questions. He tried to keep them talking in the corridor, but they invited themselves into his apartment. Sitting at the kitchen table, the policeman asked him if he had seen or heard anything unusual the night before. The young man began to sweat profusely. He told them he had gone to bed early and must have slept through the whole thing. They asked him a few more questions, but he denied knowing anything about the murder. Just then, one of the policemen noticed the hole in the wall. He got up from the table and peered through it. "Are you sure you didn't see anything?" he asked suspiciously. "I just moved into this apartment 2 days ago," said the young man, his voice shaking. "I didn't even realize there was a hole in the wall. I swear to you I didn't see or hear anything. If I did, I would tell you." The policeman eventually grew tired of questioning him, and as they said their goodbyes and left, it seemed as if they believed his story. The young man couldn't forget having witnessed the terrible murder, but the guilt of not reporting it to the police quickly evaporated and he tried to get on with his life. A week passed and the young man gradually forgot about the murder. He blocked up the hole in the wall with paper, not wanting to be reminded of the terrible crime. He also installed new locks and a deadbolt on his apartment door. One day he picked up the newspaper and saw a story about the murder of the girl who had lived next door. It said that the police were still investigating and the murderer was still on the loose. That night, the young man woke up to the sound of groaning. It seemed to be coming from the apartment next door. He was puzzled. The apartment had been vacant ever since the murder. There was still police tape on the apartment door. Try as he might to convince himself it wasn't so, the sound was definitely coming from next door. Curiosity got the better of him and he couldn't resist. He had to take a peek. With trembling hands, he removed the paper from the hole in the wall and looked through the peephole. At first, he didn't see a thing. He waited for his eyes to adjust to the darkness, but he still couldn't make out anything. He couldn't even hear the strange groaning sound anymore. Only an eerie silence. Then, just as he began to move away from the hole in the wall, he saw something. Staring back at him, through the small hole was a wide-open bloodshot eye. The young man recoiled in horror. The hideous, unblinking eye stared at him as he crouched on the floor, frozen in fear. Then, the silence was broken by a woman's raspy voice hissing, "I know you saw. I see you. You See Me" is a spooky story from Mexico about a young man who breaks an old superstition when he makes plans with his girlfriend. There are many superstitions in Mexico. Some of these ancient beliefs have been passed down from generation to generation, and others are followed because of warnings from elders and past experiences. One well-known superstition is that you should never make plans with friends or family outdoors in the dark of night. The reason for this, the older folks say, is that there are always things lurking in the darkness, listening and waiting for the perfect opportunity to trick you, take advantage of you, and destroy you. This is a story about something that happened to my grandfather when he was a young man. His name was Jose and he was just 20 years old at the time. He was working as a fisherman in the small coastal village where he was born. He still lived with his mother, and his girlfriend, Raven, lived just down the street from him. Her family owned a small boat and fished in the same area as Jose. One night, after finishing work, he met Raven and they went out for a quiet drink together. When the bar closed, they decided to head home, and their journey took them by an old cemetery. As they made their way down the lonely country road, there was only the light of the moon to guide them in the darkness. When they reached Jose's house, he said to his girlfriend, "Hey Raven, let's leave a little early tomorrow so we can cast our nets out before everyone else gets to the shore." "That's a good idea," Raven replied. "We can leave around 5 a.m. tomorrow while it's still dark. I will come to the front yard to pick you up, so be ready to go when I call you." "See you in the morning," said Jose as he kissed her goodnight. They waved to each other and went their separate ways. Early the next morning, Jose was awoken by the sound of someone calling his name. "Hey Jose, wake up. Let's go." Jose dragged himself out of bed and looked out the window. He saw Raven standing in the front yard, staring up at him. When he glanced at the clock, he saw that it was 4:30 a.m. "You're early," he called. "Just give me a minute." "Hurry up," shouted Raven. "It will be bright soon." Jose quickly dressed and grabbed his things. When he ran downstairs and opened the front door, he saw Raven was already walking down the road. "Hey, wait for me," called Jose anxiously, but Raven didn't turn around. She just kept on walking. Jose ran after her and tried to catch up with her, but then Raven started running too. He thought this was strange, and when he slowed down, so did Raven. She never looked back and just kept the same distance between them. Eventually, they neared their favorite spot for fishing, which was only a few minutes away. To get there, they had to cross a deep trench with a narrow bridge across it. When Raven came to the middle of the bridge, she suddenly stopped and stood very still. Her back was to Jose and he couldn't see her face. For some reason, Jose got a weird feeling in the pit of his stomach. Something felt wrong to him. Raven was acting very strange and he was afraid to get on the bridge at the same time as her. So he called out to her and told her to go on ahead, saying he needed to tie his shoelace. As Jose bent down to tie his shoe, Raven turned around to face him. That's when he saw it. She was grinning from ear to ear, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile he had ever seen on his girlfriend's face before. It was as if her features were twisted into an evil grimace. All of a sudden, Raven threw herself off the side of the narrow bridge. Jose got to his feet and simply stared in shock. He didn't know what to do. He was so stunned he could barely believe what had happened. Just then he heard Raven screaming, "Jose, help me. Please help me." Instinctively, he ran towards the bridge and peered over the edge. He couldn't see her anywhere. "Raven, where are you?" he cried out desperately. "I can't see you. Where are you?" He just kept hearing Raven's voice screaming, "Help me, please. Help me." Jose was about to jump into the trench to save his girlfriend when something made him stop in his tracks. He hadn't noticed it until now, but in between Raven's screams, she was laughing. It wasn't a normal laugh, though. It seemed maniacal and mischievous, almost diabolical. Jose felt the blood freeze in his veins. Shaking like a leaf, he backed away from the bridge. Something told him he was in danger. His instinct made him turn around and run in the opposite direction. He dashed down the road towards his house as fast as he could. Joe was so scared that he ran straight into his house and went upstairs to wake his mother. She was lying in bed, and when she saw Jose's pale face, she knew something was wrong. Her son could hardly speak. He was overwhelmed by fear and guilt. He couldn't help feeling that he may have left his girlfriend to drown back there. "What's wrong, Jose?" asked his mother. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I don't know, Mama, he whispered. I think something horrible has happened to Raven. His mother hugged him tightly as he cried on her shoulder. Just then he heard a voice calling him from the yard. Hey Jose, wake up. Let's go. He got up and looked out the window. He saw Raven standing in the front yard, staring up at him. When he glanced at the clock, he saw that it was 5:10 a.m. I'm sorry I'm late, she said cheerfully.